Hi, I'm Angela Williams,
And I'm Katy Sudano,
and I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse.
and I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse.
Welcome
Welcome
to
to
Voice
Voice
Up
Up
for
for
the
the
Voiceless.
Voiceless.
We're so grateful that you've tuned in with us today. Voice Up for the Voiceless is a podcast that exposes the horrific issue of child sexual abuse and exploitation. And Katie and I both are very vulnerable in sharing our own personal stories of abuse in hopes that it will help a survivor and also just help our community, our society learn more about the issues so you can have more courage if you're faced with a friend that was wanting to disclose or you recognize child sexual abuse maybe in your home. So, good to see you, Katie. Hi.
Nice to see you. I'm so excited. Today we have, um, she's very humble and I love her so much and I watch her all the time. But her name is Jan Broberg, and she's just, I just feel like a kindred spirit, like soul type of connection with her because of her story, but mostly because of her strength and what she's been through. And I'm pretty sure you guys will recognize what I'm gonna her name and what she's been on. But Jan Broberg, I'm going to read her bio for you guys, became a household name after an award winning documentary based on her kidnapping in 1970. She was, it's called Abducted in Plain Sight, and it was released in 2019 on Netflix. And then recently in 2022, she had a mini series done about her story and her life on Peacock, and it was called "A Family." I'm sorry, "A Friend of the Family." And Jen is an accomplished actress. She's appeared in over 50 films and television shows. She graduated summa cum laude from Bingham Young University for her studies in cinematic arts and theater, and served as the executive director of the Center for the Arts at, I hope I'm pronouncing this, Kayante in St. George, Utah, from 2017 through 2022. She was also honored in 2019 um, with the Hope Award from the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children for her advocacy and public outreach on behalf of children at risk of assault, particularly by someone they know. And it goes on and on. She also launched the Jan Broberg Foundation in 2022 and created to highlight her mission of helping victims of abuse heal and thrive, and to protect abuse from happening in the first place by emphasizing the insidious crime and pathology of the groomers who perpetuate these crimes. She also served as a producer on the Peacock series, A Friend of the Family, which was based on her family's horror story about the grooming and abuse by a trusted family friend. Um, and again, she's a wonderful human being. She has a tremendous story, but one of inspiration. And I know that you're going to enjoy the show and you're going to learn a lot. So, welcome,
Welcome,
Jan.
Jan.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
We just read your very impressive and long bio.
Well, you
But
didn't need to read it all.
Well, I just felt like it's so important because
Oh,
what we do is we talked a little bit before the show. What we do is so important. Our voices do need to be heard. And sometimes, unfortunately, we have to show that, hey, this isn't just a podcast on a whim because we're talking about this because we've been through it. Our guests, especially you, have done so much for the cause. And we want it to spread, and we want people to know that this stuff has to change.
so you're a celebrity, so we're a little giddy. So
oh, thank you. I don't really feel like one, but I definitely feel like if I have any influence, I want to, and if there's something to leave behind, I definitely want the world to improve because their stories, our stories were heard and believed, and that something was done to further the cause of protecting children and also helping survivors heal. That's really been my mission for the last 30 years. So thank you so much. And I have a book back there, my book, The Jan Broberg Story, on Amazon, and it has a really hefty introduction and a forward and afterward that talk about grooming and how how these things happen to everyday normal people. And the predators are often people that we know, that we love, that we trust already.
Mhm.
We don't see them because they're so good at grooming not only the child, but all the people around the child, making friends with the parents and with the church members and all of that. So it's really, my story, I think, encompasses a lot of other people's stories. So
Yeah.
I just
So
want people
Jan,
to
what
know.
for our viewers that maybe haven't seen your Netflix series and
Mhm.
your documentary, why don't you start by just telling us more about your story of abuse?
So when I was 9 years old, a family moved into our neighborhood, and we met them at church, and many activities later, many, family dinners, many campouts, many boating trips, many snowmobiling trips because he had all the fun toys. We weren't quite as well off, I guess. He had all the stuff, and his children matched me and my sisters, myself and my two younger sisters in age. So we became fast friends because we did hundreds of activities with this family. And 3 years later, when I was 12 years old, he elaborately had a whole planned out scheme and kidnapped me, took me to Mazatlan, Mexico, brainwashed me severely. I thought that I had been kidnapped by aliens, and that seems like such a weird place to start. But brainwashing and grooming and mind control, they all live within the same thing. It's an altered reality, and he had tapes that he played of these high pitched voices that I was very special and was supposed to have a baby to save this dying planet. And I was 12 and I was an innocent 12. I was the oldest in my family. I didn't have older siblings teaching me the ropes or anything. And not only that, he had prepared the brainwashing all through those first 3 years of our family's, friendship. I mean, we were such close friends. It was like he was our favorite uncle, and his kids and us, we were just inseparable. So he made sure that all the right people had been groomed, including my mother, my father, the congregation that I went to church with. Everybody loved him. He was just the new furniture store owner in town, and charismatic and so nice and so service oriented. And he just knew how to play this entire community, this very good, you know, middle America, small community, and use that for his own designs. And so when I woke up to those voices and I was strapped to a bed by my wrists and my ankles, and it was just the voices that I heard. He had given me a drug. He had picked me up from my piano lesson to go horseback riding, which we had done many times before. And often his oldest son, who was my age, would join, would go too, but this time he wasn't with him, and gave me my allergy pill, and that knocked me out. And I woke up to those funny, high-pitched staccato voices telling me that I was a very special person. They'd been watching me since I was born, and I was to have a child to save a dying planet. And I barely knew anything about what that meant or was going to mean because I still didn't see him. I was just scared to death, and would go in and out of a deep sleep. And then the leather straps would come off, and I would be allowed to go to the bathroom. The voice would say, "You can go to the bathroom. There's a cooler. You can get your favorite foods out of the cooler, your tuna fish sandwich, your almond joy bar, your quench soda pop." And those were my favorite things because we know everything about you. We've been watching you. You are part of us. That I was half alien and half human. And my mother's name happened to be Mary. And they would tell me my dad was like Joseph. He was,
Mm.
the caretaker, of Mary, who had me. And now I'm going to have the child, the savior that's going to save their dying planet. And it was over and over and over again, the story. It was pounded into my head that before I even saw him, a few days into this nightmare, the partition in the motorhome was locked, and I couldn't go out there. I wasn't allowed to go out there by the voices. And then once they told me I could go out there and that I would meet the male companion, I had been being called the female companion. And it was again this this high pitched, I mean, this crazy sounding voice that he had obviously done all these tapes and modified his voice to sound like these aliens. But I was totally convinced it was real. I mean, it doesn't take very long to brainwash completely. a child, and not much
Mhm.
longer to brainwash an adult, to be honest. If you're isolated, you're scared, and all of your basics of life are being controlled when you eat, when you go to the bathroom, if you're getting fed and watered, and all of the information around you is only this, you can be brainwashed very, very quickly, especially because he had taken us to all of the science fiction movies, all the kids that were so popular in the early 70s. And
Mhm.
we'd watched Planet of the Apes on TV that came out. And we watched, Lost in Space was
Mhm.
our TV show. And I Dream of Jeannie with a genie in a bottle, and Bewitched. We had
Mhm.
watched all these shows and they were so popular in the early 70s, and this was 1974 when I was kidnapped the first time. So when I saw him, he was on the couch of the motorhome, covered in blood, cut as if he were dead, and I'm shaking him. "Oh no, wake up, B, wake
Mhm.
up, we've been taken. You're the male companion." I told him the story that I had
Mm.
been being fed for the 3 days or 2.5 days
Mm.
that had been coming to me and crying. And if you watch the Peacock series, A Friend of the Family, I'm really proud, most proud of that, because it tells the story in context over 9 episodes with Academy Award winning actors playing my parents
Mhm.
and the bad guy and me and all of us.
Yeah, they
They're
did a phenomenal job. Yeah, it was really good. And you were in it too.
you.
I
I
saw you.
was at the I
Yeah.
got yeah, they wanted me to do something, and I got to play the therapist, which was a real character. Everything about it
Mhm.
is true. Some characters are
Mhm.
combined. There's some things that are left out or not as dramatic as they actually were because of budget. But
Mhm.
it is all true. Everything that's there, you really do get our true story, and they did such a great job with, just the writing and the context, and I got to help produce it so that I could also be part of that, making sure it was written correctly and so that people would see themselves, because I felt like Abducted in Plain Sight, which I was just the subject of that documentary, and my family, everybody was so honest, but so many people didn't get it. If you were a survivor of abuse or something, you got it, and
Mhm.
that's why it went so crazy, because it's a crazy story in some ways, but once you put it in the context of life, like just life on the home front, like our family was having, it's not crazy, and that's my point of telling my story. My story has all of this entertainment value. Like my book, you can't
Mhm.
put it down. Once you start reading it, the Jan
Mhm.
Broberg Story, you can't not quit reading it because it's so interesting and fascinating. But what my story is a combination of millions of other people's stories.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I want people to know it is almost never a scary stranger.
Yes.
Trafficking of children is not done by scary strangers.
No.
It is done by their parents. It
Mm.
is done by people that the parents know. It is so much worse than what we think because we have such a hard time believing that this is what's happening. But every story on my podcast that has to do with being trafficked, they were trafficked by someone that young person already knew, loved, or trusted. So I have a
Mhm.
podcast also called The Jan Broberg Show right now, and we're
Awesome.
trying to interrupt trauma by telling other people's stories, and that's what the common thread that people just don't know or believe is that it's someone
Yeah.
already in your
I
family, in your
I wrote one
congregation.
of my books is called The Grooming Mystery, and I think
Yeah,
that is one of the mysteries because people wanna see an old man, gruffy man in a trench coat, and
right.
that's the picture of the abuser when so often it's just all the characteristics you described, somebody who's gregarious and helpful and
Charismatic. Yeah,
charismatic
they're
and
well liked.
successful,
Mhm.
and they ingratiate themselves into the family, and then
Yeah.
they groom everyone around. So I'm so curious because I haven't had an opportunity to see your show. I want to know how you escaped. How did your family, you're gone for 3 days,
Well, wait,
obviously.
hold
Oh,
on
no,
before
I'm
you
gone for much longer than 3 days.
Oh
yeah,
wow.
no,
Okay. I
yeah,
want
but
to hear.
before that, when you were being told fed all those things through the speaker thing in the RV, was
Uh-huh.
that in Mexico or were you still in the States and then went to Mexico?
Well, I woke up to that. I'm assuming we were still in the United States, but we
Okay.
were heading towards Mexico. He had already visited now these are things I didn't know this as a 12-year-old little girl,
Right,
Sure.
right.
but now this is all in the book, and it's written from kind of my mother's perspective. She's the one that started writing our story, and so you get sort of the panic and the all of the things that how she was groomed as well. And so when you read the story, you get all the sides of the story, which I think is
Mhm.
really important
That
because
is important.
often we're concentrating, of course, on the survivor, on the victim, on the child who's been harmed. Of course we are. But we also have to concentrate on the adults around the child so that they are learning what am I not willing to see or look at? Or I've had that funny gut feeling like this person spends too much time with them or he's too nice and he's in my church congregation. And of course, but that's the easiest target is to
Mhm.
find people that are already in your family that predator is going to
Mhm.
harm. That's the easy targets. We're the easy targets, all the people
Yes.
closest to the predator. So
Yes.
that's really, really important that we start looking in the places that we don't want to see, that we don't want to actually see it. So
Yes.
going back to your question, I was missing the first time I was kidnapped actually twice by this same man.
Mm.
And he was heading towards the border because he had visited Mexico, because he and his wife had identified a young girl that was 8 or 9 years old that they were going to adopt.
Mm.
Now, I don't know what she really knew, but I'm pretty sure she knew something was wrong. I don't know because there are several girls before me that I know were abused by this same man, and they moved around a lot, and there were girls after me that I have actually talked to and communicated with
Oh,
who
wow.
were abused by this man. So I know of 7 others besides myself.
Mm.
So this is also very important that people realize it is not one and done. It is often
Mhm.
serial in nature. Predators don't just go, "Oh, today I think I'll be a pedophile and groom this family and abuse this child." They've done it before, they're going to do it again, and until we get our heads out of the sand and start seeing what there is to see, as subtle as it might be, it's there, and reporting and getting these laws changed that you were talking about, that you've been trying to get changed so that there is no statute of limitations, and then we believe the victims
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
instead of believing the predator or somehow we're the ones on trial.
Yep.
It's just disgusting. So I have a lot of things I wanna talk about that I continuously talk about, but these are some of my biggest issues and passions is to get this message out. So as we finally crossed into the border of Mexico, it was right before we actually, I think, got into Mexico that he was discovered, that I discovered that it was him, that
Mm.
it was B. We called him brother B. And so that he was the one on the sofa inside the RV covered in blood, and I'm the little girl that can now walk out from the back of the motorhome into the front of the motorhome and meet the male companion, and I still don't even understand what that's gonna mean, but I've heard enough of it's been in my ear, the voices for,
Mhm.
2.5 days, and I wake him up and he says, um, well, I don't know. As we were going to go to the horses to go horseback riding, there was this white light that came out of the car, out of the
Mm.
sky, and the car went crazy, and it was going and I was trying to get you out of the car, and, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
I must have broken the windows or something, and all I remember was this funny looking person and this funny sounding voice, and then everything went dark. So he, of course, who had perpetuated the story and created the story, just played into every Race to Space, uh, all the TV shows, everything that was surrounding my life, including our favorite hamburger joint, which was called Tasty Treat, the home of the space burger.
Mhm.
Mm.
Every single thing into that little person's mind.
Mm.
And of course I believed it, and of course I believed him. I loved him. He was like a second father. He was like
Mhm.
a friend from home. I wasn't alone anymore.
Mm.
Then he dressed me up like a boy, got me across the Mexican border in the RV, and said, "I guess we have to just do whatever they say," and part of it was to go further south, try to get down to South America, because there we would be able to um, have peace or something, some sort of a, almost a religious kind of connotation to, we've got to go to a place where there's peace and serenity, that nobody will be, looking for you, because you've got this mission to fulfill, to have this baby, to save the dying planet. And then shortly after getting into Mexico, before we actually arrived in the Mazatlan um, motorhome park where the federales found us, the rape and the abuse began. And
Mm,
this is how we have the baby, and this is what we have to do. And I'm, showing me the books and showing me what sex looked like and all of
mm,
those things. So and I was very pre-puberty. I did not hit my puberty until I was a senior in high school.
mm,
So my mom was literally sewing little pads into my shirts so I wouldn't feel so embarrassed. She would
mm,
make little
Mm.
bras for me with little stuffed,
mm,
stuffing in them, because I was so tiny and such a little thing. And so that was the first kidnapping. I was missing for over 45 days. And then the federales, working with the FBI, found us. And we were in he was put into a prison cell in a big courtyard type of prison down in the basement area. I was put in a room, just on it with a chair. There really wasn't anything else in the room. And at some point during that 24 hours or 48 hours, I'm not sure how long I was there in the room, before my parents arrived, he gave the guard his gold ring, and the guard brought me from the room that I was in down to the cells, and allowed him to talk to me through the bars. And he basically said, the Zeta and Zethra, they had a name, the aliens that were talking to us all the time. They've come to me and they've told us we can't talk about them. We can't talk about the relaxing
mm,
pills, the medication, the sleeping pills that he was giving me almost daily. Can't talk about making the baby, and we can't talk about the mission, the
mm,
mission to save the dying planet. And if we do, we'll be vaporized. And I didn't know what vaporized meant. I just knew that both body and soul will be vaporized, both body and soul. All I knew is that I was a believer, that I had a soul, and that my soul would live on forever, and that my parents and my grandparents who had died,
mhm,
they were alive somewhere, and that we'd be together forever. Those were my beliefs, my core beliefs, and how I had been raised. And so the idea of having my soul vaporized and my body vaporized, I didn't know if that meant boiling from the inside out, but it sounded very scary. And
mm,
probably out of all the things I went through, that was the scariest.
mm.
The idea that someone could destroy my body and soul, that scared me more than anything. Sorry,
Yeah.
I don't cry that much anymore over my story. I've told it.
No, how terrifying
Yeah,
for a
it's
little child.
scary.
Yeah.
12-year-old,
So
yeah.
so you went back upstairs and remained silent then?
Oh, of course. Oh, no, I never told anything. If we talked about them, we'd be vaporized. If no,
Mhm,
no, never. Didn't talk about any of it. So, once my parents came, of course, it was wonderful to see them, and I cried and cried, and they cried and cried, but I was instructed that I was only to have a relationship with the male companion. I mean, this is all the brainwashing that's happened in these 45 days, that he was to be the one, and that all other male relationships were to be put on the back burner, or they
mhm,
were not. I was supposed to stay arm's length away from any other male. So even my father, uh, and when you see the series, the scripted series on TV, and Colin Hanks is my father. He was just so incredible and so perfect. Um, it really does show me pulling away from him, even in that courtyard of that Mexican jail,
mm,
after I hadn't seen them, and I was so homesick for my sisters and my best friend, and it was complete. The brainwashing was complete, which is another reason why the adults in the world have to heal themselves from what's happened to them, so it isn't passed on to the cycle is broken. And also that we are the protectors of the children, the tweens, the teens, and the young adults, because as the brain is trying to develop and is not developed until 25 or 26, if your development is arrested by sexual assault or
mhm,
abuse rape, incest, trafficking, all of the things that I talk about ad nauseum, I guess. If that's happened, then your brain is still lagging behind in development until you have the healing and we need funding for healing the adults who are walking
Mhm.
around with this kind of trauma.
Yes. Another
Mhm.
dream I have is to have, almost like a compound, like a Cancer Centers of America
That's
for
what I want
survivors.
too. I call them
And
healing homes. I've
yes.
said it 100,000 times. I love it.
Yes,
Let's
and
do
we could
it.
have, critical care units, and we could have,
Yeah.
transitioning places as you're healing,
To
and
live,
organic
to have
gardens,
your
and horseback
children.
riding, and art therapy, and a
Yes,
chapel,
it's
and
totally what
places to
you
write,
could
and
read my prospectus on this. This is exactly what I
and have
want.
my and
How do
have
we
the little
partner? How do
because
we
the
make it
little girl
happen?
has got to heal, the
Yeah.
little boy has got to heal. I mean, you've got
Yes,
to heal from within. I say we're
yes,
like a tree, and we've got every ring. So if all those rings of our life have pain associated with
yep.
them, we've got to go back and let that piece
Mhm.
and that part heal.
Right, and
Um, eh,
we have science behind healing now. I mean, 30
Mhm.
years ago when I started talking and probably about when you started
right
talking about these things,
in the 90s, early 90s.
yeah, that's when I was that was me too. It was literally in my 20s,
And
and
I've had brain scans because I've had issues, and there's
Mhm.
so much gray matter from the trauma
Yep,
where, it like you said, there's so much science behind trauma, and especially child sexual abuse. And I
yes.
was brainwashed the same way with my stepfather, that I was his mistress, and that
Uh-huh.
he would hurt my mother if I ever told, and, kept me silent that way. And he was the pillar of the community, a very hard worker,
Yep.
very honest man. Everybody liked him, but
Mhm.
behind closed doors, he was the devil. He
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
absolutely the devil.
Awful.
And
So,
so
so sad especially to me, because I had wonderful parents who stayed together through thick and thin, who worked out the issues. I'm gonna close my door really quick. Somebody's talking outside my door. Anyway, I have always said that those who are abused by a parent, step parent, the caregivers that are supposed to be giving them the care, the food, the shelter, the love, the
mhm.
unconditional support, all of that, it's another layer of trauma that I think is just so deep. And you've been a successful person, and I have too. But I believe that I would have done much better if I had had some of the scientific healing resources
Oh, of
available to
course.
me in my
Yeah.
Oh, of
20s
course.
and
I
30s.
spent my 20s trying to, push my beautiful, wonderful husband away because I thought he deserved, somebody better. I had
Right.
all this trauma and all this sadness in me, and to this day, we've been married 40 years, and we all go through roller coaster. Life's a roller
Yeah.
coaster, ups and downs, and I fight hard to keep my joy,
Mhm.
and not go to that place, that dark place.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that is the fight. It is the fight because until you can regulate your central nervous system to feel the things that the normies, which is a name that alcoholics and addicts call the people that don't have that disease, that desire,
Mhm,
that thing that they're like, "How can you not want this?" And how hard it is, they call them the normies. I
Yeah.
call people who haven't been through sexual assault and abuse normies because you got the chance to just developmentally,
mhm,
go through childhood and tweenhood and teenhood and young adulthood and get to the part where your brain is totally, functional. Not that you don't have problems, but I'm talking the severe trauma that happens through
Most of my
childhood
childhood
sexual abuse.
most of my childhood, I was terrified, like,
Yeah.
I just lived in a state of
Constant
fear,
fear. Yeah.
so you don't
Mhm.
turn that off, like, you
Nope.
don't become 18 and all of a sudden, even though you're out of the abuse, that switch turns off. You still are fearful, and today I have to catch myself because for so long, I lived with thinking the other shoe was gonna fall. Like,
Yep.
this is too good to be true. I have peace, I have quiet, I have a beautiful marriage, I have 2 great kids. It's like the shoe's gonna drop, something terrible is gonna happen. And I
Mhm.
remember I was on a trip to, the coast of California. We had a convertible and we were driving and life was wonderful. And I just said, "I just want this feeling to go away," and I just started
Mm,
praying into it, and, before the end of that trip, I honestly can say that I released that. It
wow.
comes back sometimes, but it's not chronic like it was.
Well, and that's the point of processing,
Mhm,
releasing those little, and it's almost like a pressure cooker. You have to release a little steam at a time, and then you figure out the next part of the pot
mhm,
that is boiling, and then you gotta but you have to have guides, you have to have therapists, you need EMDR, you need a million things that
Mhm.
may or may not work for you, but they are available. They need to be
and
available
available for a lifetime.
for a
Mhm.
lifetime. Yes,
Not
because it's
not
a
30
journey.
days of therapy and we're done.
No,
Yeah.
and
Not
especially
healing
if you're
behind closed doors in isolation, you need to heal in community, and we don't have a
absolutely.
community that welcomes that healing.
Yeah,
Or even
that's so
We
understands.
need
key.
Yeah.
to talk more, I think.
I wanna talk offline, and we will. We will talk offline because I have been looking for people that get it and to partner with what,
Yes.
my foundation has said, these are the 3 pillars. It is
Mhm,
awareness, of course,
mhm,
for prevention. Of course, we want that. I'm
Mhm.
working on grooming videos of
mhm.
actual survivors who were groomed first before they were assaulted. They're all young adults and some of them a little bit older because those are the people that are now talking about it and hoping that will resonate when we can get those on the social media platforms, when we can get those out, that will resonate with young people,
That was a good one.
with the
Mhm.
teenagers, that they'll go, "Oh, wait, maybe I shouldn't be dating a 30-year-old when I'm
But it needs to
16."
start when they're honestly, it needs to start at age 2. We need
Oh,
to teach
totally.
parents. I have a book called Tough Talk to Tender Hearts, and it teaches them how to layer those conversations throughout the entire childhood, and then the children's books to teach
Yes,
them. So, yeah, we have a
absolutely.
lot. So I wanna continue your story for our
Okay.
viewers just to know how you got kidnapped twice by the same man. So
Okay.
he served no, consequences for the kidnapping?
Well, it's just like any case, people don't realize there's a time period that has to go by, right? They go to jail, they get bailed out. They're back in church with their wife and their 5 kids, sitting 3 rows ahead of our family. He's right there. It's not like he's magically disappeared. He's out of jail, he comes back from Mazatlan, Mexico, and, goes through the whatever that process is, but then he's out, waiting for what's gonna happen next.
And how did
So,
he explain it to everyone why he
that
took
he
you?
had a new thing that was relatively new is that he had a mental breakdown, depression, which he said many times before he ever kidnapped me. Again, this is part of the grooming.
Grooming?
He told
Mhm.
many people that I go to a doctor. I go to a doctor in Beverly Hills because, of course, in our little town of Idaho, there were no therapists. That wasn't even what we called them. What did we call them back in the day? Early 70s counselors.
Maybe
That
a
was
doctor.
psychotherapy was brand new basically in
Mhm.
the 60s. So it was still very brand new in small town America. You might have one maybe counselor, but we just didn't have people. And of course nobody is pushing mental health. We didn't even have that term. It wasn't even called mental health care. That
Mhm.
came much later. I didn't have mental health care on my insurance until what, 5 or 6 years ago? I
Mhm.
Mhm.
mean, it wasn't included. Maybe you
Mhm.
could get one appointment, I mean, it just wasn't there. So you have to go back in time, but you still have a hard time accessing it. And if you don't have insurance, how do you access mental health care that is trauma informed? How do you, sorry,
Mhm.
I have so many soapboxes to stand on. Okay, back to
Mhm.
the story. So so he's picked up in Mazatlan, Mexico, comes to the jail, is bailed out by his brother, gets out. He's back with his wife and his 5 kids sitting at church. And
Yep.
so he's back in the neighborhood, I mean, just lives down the street, and he begins basically a campaign about his depression and how he took me to the horses, but then he just felt like he just didn't want to go in. It was a client that he didn't like or something. There was something
Mhm.
about he was supposed to measure their house for furniture and they
Mhm.
have horses and that's why we were going there. And then he just had a mental breakdown. He just ended up not going in and thought, I'm just going to drive farther down the road. I know people
Mhm.
that are down, down towards, I don't know what he said.
Mhm.
He had a story about his depression and how he just kept driving. And he said, and then the story, of course, this is what every predator does. They flip it on those that are, they flipped it on my parents. He basically said, and besides that, once you called the FBI, then I couldn't come back to America. They would have locked me up forever. I mean, I would never hurt her. I mean, I just went crazy for a couple of days and I would have come back. Why did you call the FBI? Well, my parents also on the other end, if you watch the story, they 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 didn't know what to do. They thought we'd been in a car accident. These people are our best friends. Their kids are our best friends. We
Mhm.
are not thinking anything nefarious is going, they're not thinking that way at all. And so it took several days, plus it was the weekend. It was a Thursday, I think, a Thursday night or a Friday. And basically the office of the FBI, which is what the police finally said, look, if she's not there, you need to call the FBI, and that office was closed for the weekend. So by the time Monday rolled around and the FBI was informed and showed up at my mom and dad's house, I'd been missing for 4 days. But they thought they called their brother-in-law that was the sheriff, in that county, not Iron County. Anyway, it doesn't matter. They called him and has there been any reports of any accidents? And Gail, his wife, is over at our house. Well, he might have, how he is. He just sometimes just goes off the rails and just goes on a trip, and then he'll show up and he'll just be laughing about it. Just don't call the police. Please don't call the police. We don't want any problems, right? So
Mm.
and she's our best friend. And their kids are our best friends. This is why my story, I think, went so viral and matters so much, because you see how you, as a parent or a loved one, is being groomed. And when the child says it's grandpa, who's the pastor, or who's the leading attorney in town, or who's the Boy Scout, leader, or whatever, you don't believe the child.
You think
You-
never. So there was no
Yeah.
forensic interview? There was no forensic
Well,
physical,
there was
exam?
of me, there was, but with whatever they had then, they didn't have a colposcope. They
Gotcha.
didn't have any of those kinds of things.
Mhm.
So, yes, I was examined, but as far as the doctor could tell, everything was intact, and he said, I think she's fine. I don't think anything's happened." Of course, I'm saying, all of the things, "Gross, of course not. Leave me
Mhm.
alone."
Yeah.
All of that is coming out of my little girl mouth. And so, because of the way he was careful, we use the word, and I don't know if your show bleeps these out, but we use the word rape of a child because that's
Mhm.
what it was. But the point is, rape does not have to be violent. It does not have to be full penetration.
Mm.
If he's doing stuff down there with his body parts on my little girl body parts, it is
Mhm.
rape.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
And so I just want people to understand that it has as much of an impact on that child survivor. It's just as impactful, even if it wasn't violent, or for the woman who said
Mhm.
no, and somehow it, just worked its way. There is violence in it. And I
Mhm.
just think that's important too, because we don't talk about that very often.
You're
We
Yeah,
don't
exactly
talk
right,
and it
Janet.
corrodes the mind just as much. It
it
doesn't,
does.
that with my abuse too, it's they always ask me, how far did he go? And I don't remember a lot. I just know things happen, so I've got that amnesic wall. But yeah, like I tell people all the time, I think I was intact too, but now that you're saying this, I know there were so many weird, crazy things that he did do,
Yeah.
and that's what messes the brain up.
Mhm.
And that's what people have to
Yes.
understand too, that I like what you said. You said it arrests the brain.
Yes.
Yeah, it stifles the growth and development of it. And then everything you think about relationship wise, sex wise is skewed and
It's
altered,
filtered.
filtered and confusing. And it does, it changes you forever.
Mhm.
And a lot of times you get stuck at that age emotionally,
Yes.
you
Mhm.
know.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of the things that happen with the brain and those neural pathways, which can be redeveloped into something that doesn't keep the lights on all the time, of
Mhm.
fear. That when you talk about fear, you're talking about the lights are on all the time. You have to check
Mhm.
yourself, or you have to
Mhm.
think about, okay, why am I in fear? I'm not in danger. Everything
Yeah,
is fine.
yeah,
Whatever. But that thing the lights can be dimmed and turned off, but the right trigger can bring it all right back.
yep,
And yet I believe that there are so many things that people can can do to dim the lights, as just a way to put it,
Mhm.
but you have to have access to the tools, and then you
Yeah.
have to use the tools once
And
you
just
get
have a
them. That's the part.
compassionate society. I think just being met with compassion that
Yes,
that instead of
huge.
minimizing, um, the trauma, minimizing what happened.
Yes,
Or turning
huge.
it on to you again, like, for example, "You're so emotional." I hear that all the time. "You're so sensitive, you're so emotional." Well, okay, yeah, I know I can't play I don't wanna be the victim. I don't wanna play the victim card, but there is the truth of that things are going to make me more sensitive and more triggered, and those are things I have to say, "Okay, I need to work on that. Okay, check. Let me work on it." But in the meantime, you're feeling kind of not that people are abusing me, but it's kind of like,
Kind of.
Vulnerable.
it's
It's a put
feeling
down.
belittling or
Yes.
condescending to a
Mhm,
sense because it's like, okay, I can't control my emotions. Because when you get triggered, you go fall right back into that little girl age.
mhm.
Yep,
And it's very
absolutely.
hard to recognize. And so, yeah, there is that element of
Or you put
healing.
mask on, and it's like,
Yeah,
"Oh, it's not affecting me," and
Yeah.
become
and
very
then you just
sterile with
stuff
your
it.
emotions.
Yeah, and you stuff it down a
Stuff it
little
down.
farther, and that
Or like
never works.
yeah, the
Eventually.
normies, like you say, I love that word, I'm gonna use it now, so thank you, I'm gonna steal it.
Mhm.
The
Funny.
normies is such a good word because, they have absolutely 0 idea, and so I have compassion for them as well, but they just are so quick to judge when you
Yeah.
respond or react a certain way that is uncommon for a normie. Like, just the other day, they were like, they were reading someone was reading my book and she said, "Why didn't you just react? Why didn't you just fight back?"
Yeah.
I would have fought back. I said, "Yeah, but you have those developmental tools. I freeze." And so
Mhm.
when something
Yeah.
is happening to me, I don't have the brain capacity or the strength or the knowledge or even the
Mm.
know-how to fight.
Yep.
I just freeze.
So,
And
something
especially
I
because you were a little girl, it sounds like.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
your story intimately, but you were little. What
Mhm.
little child, they don't know. They don't have resources. They
No, and
don't
you
they,
don't know about sex either, or,
no, you don't
bad
know.
touching or private
Mhm.
parts touching type of thing. Yeah, my story started real quick, when I was 4. My mom married her, he was like a exact executive for IBM.
Wow.
And he came into our lives, very charismatic, very likable, everyone liked this guy,
Mm,
and it started, sit on my lap and, stuff like
mhm.
that, and then, basically, he was "Where's your father? You don't have a father. He doesn't love you, so I'm gonna love you, and
Mhm.
this is
This is
what
how
love
I do it.
is, and this is how
Yeah.
we do it." Yeah, so you just become, like you say, very comfortable, and on
Yeah.
the outside, me sitting on his lap, to the outside person is, "Oh, look how cute, the stepfather and
They're
stepdaughter,
bonding.
they're bonding, they're getting
Mhm.
to know each other." Meanwhile, he's doing something right there in front of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what he's getting a big rush out of it. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's really, really sad, and it's right in front of our eyes.
So, for
Mhm.
our
Eyes open.
survivors that are
Yeah.
listening, and I know this has been a lot, but I just want to touch on something Jen said, and really encourage you because pain buried alive never dies. So we have to get that pain up and out, and we
Yes.
have to process. And we're praying that as you're listening to us share our stories, listening to the successes in our lives and the failures in our lives, that it will touch you and will help you and inspire you to seek your healing, to be
Mhm.
intentional about your healing.
Mhm. And to
And
reach out to any connections or resources that you may have to
Yes.
make the change. We can't
yeah,
do it on our own.
yeah,
We need the collective, everyone who has any knowledge or resources or connections of people in
mhm,
government, people, counselors in schools,
Yes.
to promote programs that will help protect children and ultimately, hopefully, get rid of
Yeah.
this altogether.
You can go to
Yes.
Jan's Foundation. You can go to angelasvoice.com and just click on resources. There's tons of resources there. We'll have all of Jan's links
Yeah,
in this
in the
podcast.
description.
Well, man, that's a good place to end our podcast. That's a really good word.
Yeah.
We'll have to break this up probably into part 1 and part 2, Jan.
That's fine. I've been used to many places. I just did a Fox true crime podcast and then ended up
Wow.
doing another session. They're like, okay, we got to have more.
Thank you for watching. Tune in for part 2 of the interview with Jan Broberg next week on Voice Up for the Voiceless.
We thank you for watching A Voice Up for the Voiceless. We hope that you have been inspired, that you've learned something, and just to listen to Jan's amazing story. But I think the takeaway here is really when you get that gut check, because perpetrators, pedophiles are so scheming and they're
sneaky.
so just malicious and
Conning,
conning,
manipulative, all the
manipulative,
words.
all the things. So
Mhm.
as you can see from Jan's story, her whole world was manipulated and
Yeah.
groomed. So
Yeah.
we thank you for
So,
joining us. We thank you for
yeah.
Mesmerized Media for making this possible. I thank you for my beautiful co-host,
Thank
Katy
you.
Sudano.
Absolutely. We're here
So-
for you. If you have any comments or questions that you would like to ask Jan, feel free to comment. And if you don't want to comment publicly, you can always comment on our website, voiceupforthevoiceless.com/contact us, and we will for sure pass it on to her.
And we thank you for tuning in. I'm Angela Williams.
And I'm Katy Sudano. Thank you.
Thank you.